The day I should have died. An LSD, ketamine, cannabis, and nitrous oxide trip report by Psychonaut. Posted to earbud.org, October 7th, 2007. I had just got my hands on ketamine for the first time. After a few ketamine hazes, I decided that ket was one of my favourite drugs. That is, until the day I OD'd on it. Monday afternoon began with a good friend of mine coming over to do some acid. I took 2 hits and he took one around 11:30. Shortly after, I brought out the K and thought to myself, I want to get really high. I poured out a large dose, the largest I have done so far. I poured it onto my table and snorted it. I snorted 2/3 of it and stopped to take a rest. At this point, my friend thought I'd left a third for him, so he took the rest of my dose. I didn't mind, as I had taken a lot anyway. We had a really fun, relaxing trip for around 6 hours. By this point, we had smoked a few joints and done a few whippets of nitrous. I had also eaten a lot of sugar and drank a lot of water. At around 6 PM, I was sitting in my sofa when I stood up to get something. As soon as I stood up, my whole body went numb, and I just dropped back onto the sofa. I couldn't move because I could barely stay conscious, and this made breathing difficult as well. I shouted for my friend to call the fucking ambulance now, because I knew something had gone horribly, horribly wrong. I was buzzing like never before. My whole body, in fact. My senses of my physical body were jumbled, so I couldn't make out where my arms and legs were. In fact, I couldn't actually feel anything. At this point, I was taking very deep and fast breaths in a panic. After around 5 minutes of doing this, I started to feel normal again, so I kept reassuring myself not to panic. It was at this point my mouth was so very dry, and I stood up to drink some water. As soon as the water went down my throat, my heart started beating extremely fast. My friend then told me that I shouldn't eat or drink anything from the other room, as he was on the phone speaking with a 999 operator. What bad timing. Why couldn't he have told me that 1 minute before? I dropped back down on the sofa and looked down at my hands. To my horror, all the muscles in my body had tightened. Speaking was so hard now that my mouth wouldn't allow me to talk properly. By this point, I really started freaking out. I'd lost all sense in my body. My muscles were all tightened, and my heart was beating abnormally fast, and my body was buzzing like mad. By around 6:30 PM, I was convinced that my body would not be able to survive this shock of excessive drugs, sugar, and water. I get the horrible feeling that I am seconds away from death. What's even worse is the overwhelming buzzing of my body getting worse and breathing becoming even more difficult. I knew my friend was qualified in first aid and CPR. I remember telling him something along the lines of, "You know CPR, don't you? Just keep me alive." I was begging God, wishing not to die, not at the age of 19, and not from a drug overdose. And here I am, my body buzzing more and more by the second. I am getting worse. I am going to die. Being on LSD at the time definitely didn't help. It made all of those negative feelings extremely negative. And when I would say to myself, "I'm going to die," my heart would start beating really fast. A horrible feeling of adrenaline kicks in as I take deep breaths, sitting absolutely still and just praying. The first people to reach my house were the police. Now, instead of checking my vitals and trying to keep me alive, they start to ask my name, date of birth, and all the other useless crap you can't afford to waste your time on when you're minutes away from death. In a moment of anger, I shout, "What the fuck is the point of all this when I'm about to die right now?" They then ask me why I took all these drugs. Sitting there, helpless, completely crippled and caught off guard, I just stare at the police officer. There is a moment of silence where I am judged by all these people, which makes me feel even worse. The ambulance arrives and the paramedics come. After telling them what has happened, they tell me I need to walk into the ambulance. I managed to stand up with the help of 2 people, although I was completely disoriented. I step outside my house and into the back of the ambulance. My vision is so messed up I cannot see anything beyond 2 meters. I also have double vision. The ambulance heads towards the hospital, and by now I've realised that my senses are getting worse and that the buzzing is getting heavier and heavier as breathing becomes even harder. I kept asking the paramedics, who was reading some charts, totally uninterested in caring for me, if I was going to actually die right now. Those people didn't reassure me at all, and at the time, when negative thoughts would send my heart into a spasm or something, that was all I really wanted to hear. I tell the paramedic that I may wet myself, as I didn't know if I could actually hold it in right now. We're now in the hospital and on a bed when the doctor gives me 2 pills to swallow and take some blood. I urinate 600 millilitres. That's nearly 2 full Coke cans of urine. My brother arrives and I feel really bad, barely aware of my body, let alone what's happening around me. He was very heartbroken and disappointed after he heard that I nearly died from a drug overdose. My brother doesn't do any drugs, and that made the whole situation even more awkward. The buzzing throughout my body kept getting worse as well, and now my double vision only enabled me to see about 1 meter in front of me, but it was too much effort even keeping them open. In my disoriented state, I mumbled, "What a haze this is." Everything just felt like a dream. The blood results came back clean, and I stayed in the hospital for a few hours, just basically waiting the trip out. After all this, I've decided that even though ketamine is one of my favourite drugs, I won't be touching it anymore, because the margin for error is just too great. Also note that during the times where I'd convinced myself I was about to die, all I could hear in the back of my head was the sweet melodic guitar riff from Intention on Tool's 10,000 Days album. That song now has a very great meaning for me. I thought this was worth sharing today because in the news recently, in fact I think it was literally only a few hours ago as of recording this video, a drag queen from, I think it's the show RuPaul's Drag Race, the Vivian was the name of the person in that. They died after taking ketamine, and it was actually a cardiac arrest caused by taking ketamine. So, for anyone who knows me, throughout the channel I've talked about my struggles with ketamine addiction. It's something that's haunted me for many years now. Finally, after all this time, I'm starting to get a grip on it. Relapses happen, and that's part of the journey towards recovery. But yeah, I also am very cognizant of the fact that I hate being addicted more than I hate the idea of recovering and being bored and having to change, because realistically that was what was preventing me from really locking in and getting better. Was I still had some love for the Special K, whereas now anytime I may relapse it's just hell. I feel disgusting in my own body. Mentally I feel like I'm slipping into psychosis. I've had some very disturbing mystical experiences on ketamine, but it must also be said I've had some extremely insightful experiences and experienced some transcendent states of no self and peace, no mind, all of the good stuff. But the problem with that is because ketamine, in contrast to psychedelics, for at least me, psychedelics are sort of anti-addictive for me. I could never really find myself using them habitually, like in the method of taking them every other day or every day. You can use psychedelics habitually like every weekend, but I did do that, but I never fell into using them like daily or every other day. But ketamine really got a grip on me, especially because it can be the ultimate form of escapism, especially for overthinkers like myself. I'm constantly always analysing stuff all the time. I guess it's just my brain type. So when I did discover ketamine through partying and raving, it was just like the feeling I'd always been looking for in a sense, and that naturally resulted in me getting addicted after a period of intense trauma and suffering, and I just escaped into it quite literally, and it became part of my, literally it was part of my day-to-day life. I was using like 0.5 grams to a gram every day, and then as I was using more, had to increase the size of my lines, increase the size of the dosage. So it ended up being like consuming almost 4 grams a week for many, many years. And it was ripping apart my organs. Thankfully, I got very lucky. My bladder, I mean, probably don't have as good of a bladder as I did before I got hooked on Ket, but I managed to mitigate the effects by taking good care of my body with ECGC, green tea extract, NAC, just keeping I'm pretty healthy when it comes to my diet. I drink water all the time. I'm absolutely obsessed with herbal teas, and I think they mitigated the bladder damage, but it, like I say, it's almost like putting a plaster on a wound that's slowly gaping even further. Yeah, you're sort of blocking out, you're blocking the blood from pouring out and all the damage from sort of exacerbating, but the problem is still there and it's still going to get worse and worse. It's literally just a plaster. You're not actually fixing the damage. It's not healing. It's just slowing the destruction process. What really messed it up for me is my gallbladder, and I actually have inherited a dysfunctional gallbladder from my family, so I was always going to be affected by ketamine abuse worse than other people. Some people can abuse Ket for God knows how long, be completely addicted to it psychologically, and never have any physical side effects. For me, I have experienced all of the worst side effects of being a ketamine addict, and interestingly enough, I think, having spoken to many K addicts and health professionals, because I've met many people going out and about to raves and parties and not even parties, but like music events, festivals, etc. And just from talking to people, I've spoken to many like health practitioners and urologists and just like doctor type people, and they have all said to me the common thread is that whilst we understand a lot about ketamine, we also don't understand a lot about the long-term impacts, and also just about how much stress it might put on, say, our heart and our central nervous system. Because if you're taking a very extreme drug like ketamine, because it can be a very extreme substance. I've had experiences where I literally thought I was dead. Like, I've had experiences like this where I wouldn't say the guy overdosed on it. I just think I think he had a cocktail of chemicals and had a lot of ketamine and was not used to the higher dose states, and so basically sort of went into a K-hole on top of the LSD and the cannabis and the whippets. I don't really think it had much to do with the water. If anything, the water has probably really helped him out. But sugar as well, it must also be said that that's also affecting your brain as well, and this cocktail of substances will have had a destructive synergistic effect, and it's no wonder he thought he was dying. I've had moments like this when I've had more times than I can count where I've had like an experience of my literally brain shutting off and everything going black, and like screaming and wriggling around trying to reset my brain back into reality. And I have noticed since many of them experiences, my mind hasn't been as sharp. I'm still recovering mentally from ketamine, and I'm really just trying to recover the best I can. The big one is really getting back in terms of health, in regards to like taking magnesium and NAC, and just trying to like just look. If you're struggling with this, really just look on Google and Reddit, like ketamine recovery, the best supplements for ketamine recovery, and the best diet for it. And I have to be careful with what I eat now because my gallbladder has definitely been affected, and sometimes it can flare up from the many K cramps that I've had. It's definitely impacted my gallbladder, but thankfully the human body has a brilliant ability to heal over time if you're not flooding it with the poison that's slowly tearing it apart. Realistically, you should obviously like get back on a health kick. You should start exercising and take supplements and just get back in gear in terms of your health. But realistically, the healthiest thing you can do is abstain from using the thing that's slowly ripping you apart from the inside. And it'll be different for every ketamine addict, 100%. Every single ketamine addict has a different experience of the horrors of what can unfold when you get stuck on this substance. And it looks like it's really starting to reach a horrific crescendo in terms of our culture, especially here in the UK where ketamine is literally everywhere. And even in the wider world, say, in like the celebrity world, it's becoming more apparent how hooked certain people can get on ketamine. Elon Musk says that he takes ketamine every week or something in terms of a actual medical procedure, but examining this guy's behaviour and seeing what he gets up to and imagining what he gets up to behind the scenes, I'd say that guy might be abusing ketamine. He even exhibits some behaviour that I've seen in fellow ketamine addicts. Just the way his eyes move, and I think it has really impacted his brain, and it's impacted my brain and my personality and everything about my life. And it was almost a bit like being possessed by a demon. The amount of horrendous experiences I've had with ketamine, like wanting to throw it away and being like, yeah, I'm finally done with it now, and then scurrying across my room into the bin, try to find all the shards. Really quite degenerate behaviour, but it's something that I just have to reflect upon and realise that, yeah, that's not me anymore. That's not my life, and there's way greater things than being stuck in a K-hole. And I was just doing it all the time. If there was every single waking moment of my life and every experience that could be experienced in a day-to-day, I would use ketamine to like anchor myself to existence. And coming off it was like, oh, I'm just going for all the natural suffering that comes with ridding yourself of something that your whole existence is predicated upon, not being able to get out of bed, being completely dopamine deficit, because again, a lot of the K addiction can be dopamine dependent. If you're using it as like a reward system, your brain's going to get hooked on that. For me, it was, oh, I've finished my work for the day, or I've done my chores, I've taken the rubbish out, I've cleaned the dishes. It's time to relax and reward myself with insane amounts of ketamine, which when you're doing that for years on end, that's going to be very hard to rewire yourself into a new state of being, which is sober life. It's really the only way. You've got to realize it down to your very core, that because sometimes as addicts we're like, oh right, well I'll have a stint off it for a month and then I'll get back on it, just as a weekend on special occasions. But when you're so like psychologically attached and spiritually attached to this thing that's destroying you, I'd say 90% of people, this is just me guessing, but everyone's different. But for me, definitely I can't use it again, quite clearly. I can't use it again, but I've experienced all of the beautiful mystical things about ketamine, which is also a thing that I must say, whilst it's important to raise awareness of the addictive potential of ketamine and the health risks, and to be conscious of the fact that it's probably even worse than we're seeing right now. It's probably going to be even worse as the years go by, and it's only going to get worse before it gets better. And it's really got a hold of young people. I'd like to actually do a video where I'd talk about, say, like ketamine in the UK. What is the connective tissue? Because there's a lot of factors that go into why it's taken over sort of the youth consciousness of today. And it's not even the youth. Obviously the youths are using it, like people in their early teens or even younger, but it's staying with them for like 10 years. At least it was for me, like when I first started getting on it at like 17, and now I'm 27, so it's been literally 10 years since I used it, and that's crazy. I don't want it to go on for another 10 years, because it's only gotten worse. It started off to, it's just a party drug that I just use, and then every year I was slowly becoming more ingrained into my state of being. So yeah, we need to be very aware of the health effects of ketamine, both psychologically and physically. But it must be said, as I have covered many times on this channel, if used wisely, and that is the key word here, wisely, if used with consciousness and awareness and enough understanding of your own psyche to realise it, because some people will experiment with it and have these mystical states, as many of us K users have done, but our brains are sort of wired up to get addicted to it. You've got to really have a good control over your own mind and really have enough willpower to only use it when is appropriate and not get hooked on it. Don't do loads of ketamine and have all these mystical experiences, which you can have, and you can have experiences of eternal peace and transcendent states of mind that you could never even imagine right now in your sober state. Some of the things I've experienced on ketamine are absolutely beautiful, like lying in my bed and putting headphones on and putting like Nintendo ambient music on and having a bit of K and letting myself literally just fly around these weird like thought form structures in some other like non-Euclidean universe. It's absolutely crazy, and letting the music like whisk my consciousness up and down as the music would like intonate and shift between like tones and ranges, and absolutely beautiful stuff. But unfortunately, you get hooked on that and you're like, oh my god, this is like the most immense piece I've ever felt in my life. And then you sort of want to permeate that piece into your normal mundane day-to-day existence, and that's when you get seriously hooked and ketamine takes over your life. But yes, like I say, it must be acknowledged that if you can use it wisely and consciously, it can be an amazing tool for exploring the mind. But you have to be very, very in tune with yourself and understand whether you're a type of person who's going to get hooked on dissociative states, and if you've got that element of your ego that really wants to escape, is it really right for you right now? Probably better to wait later down the line when you've got all of your like survival stuff in your life sorted, you've got a good foundation and you're grounded, rather than using it when you're ungrounded, because quickly the ketamine will become your ground for being, and that is very destructive, especially when it starts to rip apart your organs. I tell you what, if any of you have experienced K-cramps, you know just how ridiculously painful that is, and how utterly sad it can be to experience them and go through this excruciating pain and still go and pick up the next day. And that's how deeply dark the ketamine addiction hole can get. For me, I've done it, I've got it out of my system, I've burnt through my my ketamine karma, and it's now time to really live life and move on, because there's way more to life than living in a K-hole, 100%. But for any fellow addicts and anyone in recovery, I absolutely feel for you 100%. You've got this. But sometimes you have to be honest with yourself that sometimes you have to like relapse more and more and more to eventually literally hate everything about ketamine and start to love the idea of recovering, because you have to be fully in on the idea of recovering and wanting to get better, because if you're not, even a slight percentage, you're going to fall back into your bad habits. It's a journey and it's not going to happen overnight, but just try and love yourself a bit more, I guess, and that's easier said than done, but it's the only way. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this and found it insightful. I would suggest anyone who's not in the know about the current like social and cultural zeitgeist going on with ketamine abuse to just type in ketamine and on the news and see what's going down. There was Matthew Perry who was involved with a ketamine related death. And then that makes you think, if they're going through it, think of the hundreds of thousands of people who are actually going through it all over the world. That's just the celebrity world. That's just the world that we're shown because everybody has decided that celebrities are more important. But yeah, whatever, that's a whole other story. Obviously, no one's more important than any other person. We're all in it together, aren't we? Check out BBC documentaries on ketamine, Vice documentaries, get yourself informed, and yeah, be very, very cognizant of the fact that it is a very real addiction and can be super destructive, just as destructive as other addictions. I think people really don't understand just how bad it can get, because I've had many comments on my videos talking about ketamine addiction where like people will sort of project and say like, oh, it's only ketamine, bro, it's so easy to get off. I just did like 5 ounces the other day and now I'm ready to not do them ever again. But yeah, that's just the nature of YouTube and just lack of education and awareness, and hopefully this helped you become a little bit more aware, and if not, maybe it sparked some interest to become more aware. There's many better videos than mine out there, like I say, Vice and BBC, definitely check them out, and I'd like to cover it more in the future as my recovery journey continues to proliferate. Anyway guys, much love and see you on the other side.